Needs a Father, let me give a bit of background just about the course. It was actually founded by a South African pastor by the name of Cassie Custance. He was also the chaplain for the Springbok rugby team in 1995 that won the World Cup during Nelson Mandela's era. And so he's basically involved with a lot of the developing nations, especially in Africa and throughout the world, just trying to raise leaders in the third world countries. We invited him over in 2018 to come and deliver the course in Fiji. And so we had about 60 pastors and men that attended the course, as well as sports coaches that attended the course in Suva. I think Nawai was also part of the one of the men or fathers that also joined the session as well. And so, and I think each of the fathers was given the responsibility of going and also do the training as well in different parts of Fiji as well. So we did an online course about 2 years ago. And so we thought we'll get started again, and hopefully some of those that have gone through the training will also help out as well during the course. How the program started. Okay, so how the World Needs a Father started was, so this was actually a refugee camp in Sierra Leone that the Pastor Cassie Custance was actually in this refugee camp. And so towards the end of his counseling sessions that he was having with a lot of the refugees, at the end he asked some of the men just to come in and just to share the experience of how they ended up in the refugee camp. And so as he sat down and he listened one by one to each of the men that were sharing, each person came in and they had a similar story as the previous men that came in. Some of them came in with one limb, just one arm. Some of them came in with no arms. And so they said that when the rebel soldiers actually came in, they started slaughter. They actually lined the families up, and they started slaughtering them one by one, from the kids to the parents. And then as they approached, some of them, a lot of them just scattered. They just ran for their lives. And that was how some of the men were able to survive and ended up in the refugee camp. But what was a bit concerning to and caught the Pastor Cassie off guard was that most of the rebel soldiers that were actually committing these acts of violence were actually members of their own family. These were men that had been children, basically, that had been brainwashed and forced to actually commit these acts of violence against their own family members. And so what Pastor Cassie did was, he ended the sessions. He got on his knees and he just started praying, Lord, you need to show me a way. You need to show me a way of how we can address this issue. And so, this was how the topic of the world needs a father actually was birthed, along with another of how he can actually reach them through sports as well, which is a concept in sport which is called whole life coaching, or ubabalo, which they call in Africa. So this was how he started the journey of the world needs a father, and how they and this is one thing led to another, and they were able to get things moving, and he was able to put notes together, and that was how it was founded. So it was founded, can't remember exactly the year that it was founded, and so chapter 1 basically talks about that. When he titles it, well, this was actually the quote of one of the fathers. He said, Satan came to earth, sir, was basically his quote. That was the day he said that Satan came to earth and started slaughtering and killing most of the villagers in their village. And so it looks about the background of that. Malachi chapter 4 verses chapter 6 says, he will turn hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else I will come and strike the land with a curse. And so it's quite a strong statement, a strong verse that God is actually saying, you know, he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, or else he will strike the land with a curse. And so the onus and a big responsibility for us as fathers to turn our hearts towards our children, and likewise children to their fathers. Okay, so let me skip this. In chapter 2, what we'll basically be doing in chapter 2 is looking at a bit of the stats in terms of fatherlessness. And so this is the cry of the children. So let me just share with you a few stats from chapter 2. So research in many countries over the last 5 years has shown that dysfunctional family life is the biggest problem in the world today. And fatherlessness is at the center of the problem. And so when we talk about fatherlessness through the sessions, there are two types of fatherlessness that we talk about. The first type of fatherlessness is when the father is absent, the father is not present, maybe through postings overseas, maybe through work, maybe through death. The father is just passed on and he's just not present, or maybe through divorce, where the father well, there's a divorce and the father is just not there in the life. And so that's the first type of fatherlessness, is when the father is not present in the life of the child or at home. The second type of fatherlessness is when the father is present in the home but is absent. And so, say for instance, you know, you'll come home, and sometimes for us men in the church, we are also guilty of this. Is that, you know, sometimes so a typical man will probably work late. They'll probably come home, or sometimes they'll go play, and maybe they'll hang out with their mates over grog, or maybe Bible studies and prayer sessions. And I'm not saying it's bad. Okay, by the time they come home, it's probably 10 or 11 o'clock at night. The children are asleep, and so you wake up in the morning. It's breakfast. Probably the only time that you engage with them is probably over breakfast, and then you're off to work. The child is off to school and back again. You know, and so that's probably the worst case scenario. And so, you know, probably the contact that we as fathers will have is probably only about an hour or so. And so you are present at home. The father is present at home, but is not engaged in the life of a child. And that is the second type of fatherlessness where we talk. Or sometimes you'll have fathers that will be at home, but are basically on their phones, you know, throughout, or on their laptops, or watching TV, watching rugby. You know, and so this is the second type of fatherlessness that we talk about, is that they are present but are not engaged in the life of the child. And so some of the stats that we look at, and so these are some of the other problems that we highlight as some of the biggest problems all over the world. So one is family, there's corruption, there's education, and lack of moral values. And so we look at this in entirety as some of the major problems, but fatherlessness being at the core of the major problems in the world today. And so these are just some of the stats that have come through. So these are some of the fatherlessness stats that we look at. So 70% of juvenile state-operated institutions come from fatherless homes. 85% of children with behavioral problems come from fatherless homes. 90% of children come from homeless children come from fatherless homes. 71% of children who do not finish school come from fatherless homes. 63% of suicides come from fatherless homes. 80% of rapists motivated by displaced anger come from fatherless homes. And so if you look at all these major problems that we have, not only around the world, but also in Fiji, a high percentage of all these crimes are committed by children that actually come from fatherless homes. So we ask ourselves, what is the biggest problem in the world today? It is fatherlessness, if you look at the stats. And so we as fathers contribute, well, fatherlessness contributes to some of the biggest issues in the world today. And so sometimes we talk about programs, rehabilitation programs, or reconciliation programs, which are good. But what it does is that we're only dealing with the surface, and we're not touching the root cause. And if we really want to address all these issues, then fatherlessness is one of the key issues that we really need to deal with. Because if we don't touch fatherlessness, all we're doing is all the programs that we run at church and in prisons are basically just surface. We're just touching, skimming the surface of just trying to address homelessness or drop out of schools or behavioral problems. But really, we really need to start getting fathers to play their roles in church, not at church, but basically at home. And so this is probably what we'll cover in chapter 2. We also look at the 6 dimensions of a human being, the effects of the father in the moment. And so when the father is not present at home, how does it affect the child intellectually, emotionally, physically, socially, as well as spiritually and environmentally? And so these are some of the areas that we will talk about as well during that. I think one key point to mention as well in terms of the spiritual development is this. The image of God to a child at 6 years old is derived from the image that they carry from their own father. Because I thought of sharing this slide because it's really powerful. And so if a father is absent at home, it basically portrays to the child of an absent father. If a father is disconnected, it portrays to a child of a disconnected God. If the father is pessimistic, then it portrays of a pessimistic God. Likewise, if a father is abusive at home, it portrays to a child of an abusive God. And and so all this the image of God to a child is derived from the image of their physical father at the ages of 5 to 6. And so the question is, what are we as fathers, as men, are doing or portraying ourselves to our children if we have children around that age? Because that is basically the image of God that they will be drawing from us or from those fathers that have children around those age. And so we are God with skin for our children. And so it's important for us, if we have children around that age, that whatever we portray to them is basically portraying to them the image of God to them. And so later on, they will grow up with that mindset of whether of a loving God or an abusive God, or an absent God or a loving, a caring father in that instance. Okay, so we'll move on to chapter 3. I know there'll be a lot to unpack, and I'll share the video, and you're most welcome, and then we'll just have a time of question and answers at the end. We look at the seasons of life, basically understanding the rhythms of life. And so for us as fathers, so I'll show you this season, this season. And so this is basically shows the map of a child from ages 1 to 25. So between the ages of 0 and 6 is when children are basically developing intellectually or cognitively, mentally. And so at this stage of their development, the mother has the greatest impact in the life of a child. Okay, and so from 6 to about 12 years old, this is when children start to develop the basic competencies as well as the physical development of their bodies. And so, during this time is when fathers actually have a great impact in the life of the child during the physical development years of their life. Now, from ages 12 to 18 is the social development phase of a child's life. And at this phase, this is where their peers will actually have the greatest impact in their lives. And so for us as fathers and as parents, if we have not laid a good foundation from the ages of 0 to 12, then their peers will start to define life for them. They will start to follow their peers. But if we are able to give them a good foundation from ages 1 through to 12, then that will actually carry forward with them as they live their lives. And so important for us as fathers that during that period where we have the greatest impact between 6 and 12, that we really need to be there to impact the life of a child. Because once they turn 12 and 13, yes, we can still have some impact in their lives, but more of the impact will actually be from their peers. They will start to follow them, the dress code, the hair, the things they talk about will start to have an impact on their life. Now we'll have a bit of, fathers will have a bit more impact between the ages of 18 to 21. this is when children or teenagers will start to have a bit of that identity, starting to find out their identity in life as well as culturally. And so this is where we have a small window again to impact them during this phase. And then from 21 to about 20 years old is when the culture around them will start to have an impact on their lives. Their upbringing, the environment, the village, their workplaces. This is actually where they are going through that training phase as well of developing at the workplace, where their careers actually start to take a center stage in their lives. And so this is where the fathers, the cultural environment will start to play an impact in their lives. And so, so these are just the different areas. And so, so ages 1, intimacy, the trust of the impact of their mother, with the 4 years old in the industry. Age 5 is when they start to develop those strengths. Age 9, sexuality, identity from ages 10 and 11, the friends. And so these are some of the things that we actually go through. Because the question that we ask the fathers is, if I take us back, to the initial stages, how do we complement? Oh, sorry, I'll actually share that a little bit later on. And so later on, and then not only up to ages 25, then we look at us as adults as well. And so we go through the stages, especially those between 25 and 35. And then for most of us who are probably middle age, half time is around 43 to 48. And so we talk about the period of life that we're in during this age group, and so some of us will probably, during the ages of 43 to 35, we start to reevaluate our life and looking at the second half. So if you look at it in a rugby game, from ages 1 to 43 is the first half of our lives. Between the ages of 43 to 48 is when we go through this halftime. And so we reassess what the second half of our existence will start to look like. And so from 48 to 70 is when we reach the significant season, which is when we want to make a significant impact in our surroundings, at home, or wherever we are called. And so we go through this seasonal, with the seasons through, as well as for us as fathers. And then let me move on. And so this is what we talk about at the halftime, the second half of life between the 48 and 70-year-olds. And so we go through that. Chapter 4, we look at the father wound that has been revealed and healed. And so let me just move forward. Okay, maybe, yeah. And so, well, put it this way. A lot of us have insecurities. When we grow up, we have a lot of insecurities, or there are certain habits that we portray that we don't realize why we do things the way they do, or why we do things in a certain way. And so some of it is, so some of it could be, if your wife does something bad, you give her the silent treatment, or or some people react abusively, and so this is the result of a father wound. Maybe something that your father or your mother did to you when you were a child, and these are some of the habits that stay with you, and that you start to behave, and you start to live it out. And so we look at wounds that are afflicted by neglect due to absence, or neglect as a result of negligence. And so these are two of the areas that we talk about, because we as fathers are not fulfilling our duty, and so we don't fulfill it in these two areas. And so we explore this. What are some of the father wounds that have been developed as a result of us not fulfilling our roles in the home? And then so we look at the deficiencies when people live with insecurities. We also talk about the father wounds, and so somebody mentioned, a psychologist mentioned, that no other wound impacts like the father wound. The father wound is a yearning never fulfilled. 7 out of 10 struggle with it. The father wound causes sadness, anger, weakness in confidence. And if and I guess this mirrors that longing for us as believers having a relationship with our Father God as well. And so no wonder it translates to us as human beings as well, is that nothing impacts like a father would. And so more importantly for us as men as well, to understand our role and not to wound our children through neglect. And so we go into these areas a bit deeper during the course. And so we talk about healing, how we can get healing from the father wound. And so these are 4 steps that we actually cover in obtaining healing through the father wound. Chapter 5, we look at real manhood and also look at real fatherhood as well, dissecting the cultural character of man. And so this will look at the roles of the father. And maybe just let me just share this just so that we can have an understanding. So there are only 2 verses in the Bible that you will find where God the Father actually talks to God the Son, okay, where he talks to him verbally. These are the only 2 passages that you'll find in Matthew chapter 3, verses 17, during Jesus' baptism, and also in Matthew chapter 17, verses chapter 5. This is on the Mount of Transfiguration. And so what God the Father tells Jesus is this on Mount of Transfiguration. He says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Okay, this is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. And so from this verse, we're able to identify the 4 key roles of a father, of how God the Father related to God the Son, or when he spoke to him verbally. And so we can draw some similarities of how God the Father related to God the Son, and therefore we can also translate it to us as fathers and how we relate to our children. And so this is where we draw the 4 roles of the father. And so one is, this is my son. It talks about identity. Whom I love, it talks about emotional security. And then with him, I am well pleased. It talks about affirmation. And then listen to him. It talks about moral authority. So from this verse, where God the Father talks to God the Son, we're actually able to draw out the 4 roles or the 4 principles of how a father should also relate to his children. Is establishing identity, providing that emotional security, providing the affirmation, and the moral authority as well in the leadership at home. And so this is where we as fathers, and then we go through this during the course through all these sessions, and we go into deeper in it. And so let me just run through that as well. So these are the 4 responsibilities of the father that we go through. A father establishes authority, confers identity, provides security, and affirms potential. And so how do we do this is the question that we try to unpack during the course. Okay, so okay, and so we also highlight a bit of some of the responsibilities of a mother, which we'll go into deeper. Chapter 6 is when we start. Then we start talking about each of the 4 roles, how do we establish authority. Okay, and so these are and it's divided into 4 parts, where we look at moral authority, a clarity of purpose. And so in order for us to execute authority, we must also be clear with our purpose in life. Because if we are not clear about our purpose in life, then how we execute moral authority will be from a what perspective. And so we go through that purpose, getting clarity, how to develop that moral authority, and then assuming disciplinary responsibility. So when we talk about authority, it's not about discipline where you give hidings or we punish kids. That's a small part of it towards the end of establishing moral authority. And so the first 3 parts are quite heavy in that instance as well. Okay, and so we look at a moral authority in that perspective. Is the moral compass and how fathers should apply the authoritative responsibility at home or to the children. Okay, and so we look at that. The Christian moral authority is to do the right thing by following the Bible at the right time through the Holy Spirit for the right reason through our conscience. And so this is, in a sense, the basis of a Christian's moral authority. Doing the right thing of what the Bible says about it at the right time through the direction of the Holy Spirit for the right reasons through our conscience as well, and through the Holy Spirit. Okay, and so we look at that authority in that perspective. Part 2 talks about the clarity of purpose. Okay, and so we look at our calling. Our primary calling purpose is to follow God, and so we talk about 2 callings. We have our primary calling as well as our secondary calling, and our primary calling for all believers is this: is to follow God and His instructions as He works through us towards the completion of His mission. Life is about God being on a mission, become part of God's mission. And so for all believers, our primary calling is basically the same. We have a mission. God has a mission that we should be part of. And, so some of us in our careers, some of us at church, some of us at home, and it depends where you are called to be. But all of us have a mission that that is part of God's bigger mission as well. Okay, and so, and then, but the secondary calling is where we differ, and so we go through in detail of understanding what our calling is in life. And when we go through the training, it's also interesting that a lot of men at our old age still do not understand the secondary calling in life, or apart from the primary. Yes, they understand the primary calling, but sometimes they find it hard to understand the secondary calling. And so the secondary calling that we go through looks at what God has gifted you. What are some of those? What the context or your environment demands, or is a great demand or need, and then what are some of the gifts and talents that you have? And they say where those 3 intersect is most probably your secondary calling in life. And so we go through this in detail of understanding what God expects of you, what your context is yearning, in need of or crying out, and what are some of the gifts and talents that you have that you can apply to them. And so we look at through that in terms of that. And so as a result, something that we hope to achieve is that every person would have a purpose statement that they will be able to develop through the course. And so that purpose statement can actually help drive you in the next season of life that you are actually part of. Okay, and so that's the purpose statement that you can develop. If you don't have one, then the sessions will help you develop a purpose statement for your life. Part 3 actually looks at how to develop moral authority, and so looks at some of the key principles of how we can develop that moral authority in our life, submitting to the moral authority of God's word, and so on. Okay. And then part 4 actually looks at the disciplinary responsibility for us as fathers. And then we talk about 10 basic principles of discipline, and then we talk about how we can practice it as well. A community of discipline. We look at some of the forms of discipline as well. And we talk about what are some of the pros and the cons as well in terms of some of the forms of discipline that we can administer as well. And so that we all cover at chapter 6. Chapter 7, we talk about identity, and identity is probably one of the biggest topics as well for the world needs a father. And so it is moving from a identity of confusion to an identity to clarity. And so that through that again we look through part 1. We talk about identity of a person, and so this is a sort of a picture just to summarize something that we go through. So sometimes we have a presented me, actual me. So actual me is when you are on your own, and so this is how you behave on your own. This is the image that you portray. Then you have a presented me, or presented self. So this is the image that you present when you're in front of other people, or maybe when you go to church, you put on another mask, or this becomes the image that you present when when you're out with your friends. And then you have another image, which is the perceived me. Okay, so these are the 3 images that each person has. Is the person that you are true to yourself, okay, when you're on your own. the one that you present when you're in front of other people, or you're trying to when you're trying to appeal to them, or you're trying to when you're going out with dating with your girlfriend, you probably try to put on your best behavior. So you have your presented self, and then you have the perceived me, is what people perceive of you. Okay, but when we go through the identity, is that we want to strive to get the true unified me, or the true unified self, is where your actual self is the same as your presented self, as well as your perceived me. And so where all of this intersects is where you are at peace, where your true identity really comes out, and you're comfortable with yourself. And so you don't have to present yourself differently when you're with people, or when you're at home. And so we talk about this segregated self that a lot of people actually go through because of identity crisis. And so we look at the Johari window as well. And so every person, and so we talk about blind spots, so some of us have blind spots that we can't see. And so some people can actually see our habits, some people, and so some habits that you may have, you're not aware of. And so we look at the Johari window, where we start to discover what are some things that, some habits that you have that you are not aware of, that somebody else is aware of. And so some things that people see, but they do not know, and so they just see the surface. So we look at that as well, in a bit of a behavioral assessments, where you can actually do a behavioral assessment just to discover what are some of the traits as well. And and so these are the two identities that we talk about. The primary identity is I'm a Christian, a child of the living God. And our secondary identity is I'm a man with a past, present, and a future. Okay, so we have a past that because of our past, the choices that we made in the past, it reflects the present self that we have, or some of the habits that we have. But we are also a man of the future. We can change some of our ways. Okay, and so in part 2 of how a father confers identity, we look at that primary identity, and then in part 3 we actually look at the secondary identity. So what I just basically talked about is our identity is made up of our past, our present, and also our future. Okay, and so we go through this in depth. Also, it's a good opportunity for us to actually do, a coat of arms. And so for you as a family, you can develop a coat of arms, which basically becomes your mission statement for your family. And so when you develop this for your family, you can actually put it up on your front door of your house. And so every time you walk out of the home, not only you, but your kids as well know, the whole family knows, this is our mission statement. These are the values that identify us as a family. What are some of the things that we value? And so you can come up with a coat of arms for your family, and it's a good exercise for the family to actually do, where you set around. And so this is common within businesses or the corporates, where they would have a mission statement or the value statements. And so this is something that we can actually do for the homes as well, for our homes and for our families, is to what is our mission statement and what are the values that will define us as well. And so something that we can actually do. Again, like I mentioned, and so so the choices have consequences. And so we look at the values, and the decisions that we make in the past will define the culture that we create that will have consequences. And so the question is, what kind of values that you are instilling in your family or your children that will determine the culture that they have, that will determine the consequences that they will face later in life as well. And so we look at that in depth as well. Okay, and chapter 8, we look at a father provides security. And so basically walking the journey from fear to love, and fathering not out of fear, because a lot of times you have fathers that will father out of fear, where expectation, because of a certain expectation, you want your children to perform. And if they do not perform to that certain level, then you are disappointed because they didn't perform to that level. And therefore, what you do as a father is that you sometimes will lead by guilt and shame, where you make them guilty by the words that you say or the actions that you portray as well. So the question is, how can we move from a fathering in fear to fathering in love? And so when you father in love, it's through abundance, the shared grace, the appreciation that leads to freedom and joy, where you allow your children to live their lives in freedom and joy, knowing that they are still loved, irrespective if they do not meet the performance that is expected of you or at home as well. And so when I talk about that, it's not talking about compromising their faith, but for an example, if your child goes to school or plays sports, and so the expectation is that you want them to do well, to study well, to get good grades. And if they do not get good grades, you are disappointed. And so when you get disappointed, you have two options of two decisions to make in terms of how you relate to a child. Either you'll instill fear by getting angry at them and disciplining them, telling them that if you don't improve, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get punished, you're going to get grounded, and you instill all that the fear. Or you can do it in love, where you can actually talk through them, understand the context of why they didn't perform well, and then actually move through. And something that I just was reminded is that for us as fathers as well is to understand the seasons of life that a child goes through. And so if you have a daughter and she's actually going through her menstruation period season, understand that when she goes to school, she won't be able to focus as much. And if it's during her exam periods, her grades will drop. And so for you as parents, how do you need to, as fathers, especially for us as fathers, we really need to understand the seasons of life that our children go through. Because if we do not understand what our daughters are going through during that period, we won't understand why the drop in their studies or the concentration span. But if they're going through the period during the exams, then that will result in that. And so, so just to be aware of the seasons of life. And so for us, it's important for us as parents that we understand the seasons of life that the children are actually going through, so that we can actually start to communicate or relate to them better. Okay, and so those are the two options of how we establish that emotional security. Okay, and so let me just jump through to. Okay, so we talk about that investigative listening, how we can be better listeners as well. In chapter 9, we talk about how a father affirms potential. So learning the language of building them up. Okay, and so we look at the seasons of life again that a child goes through, and how. So if you have a child between the ages of 6 and 7, as they are developing physically, the best level of affirmation that you can share with them is to affirm them of their physical traits. Okay, so you can actually start to, if your son is growing, you can actually start to admire their muscles, because these are the affirmations that a child will get. Or and so if you, during this season of life that a child is going through, and if you were to say something negative, it can greatly impact their lives, because this is the stage where they're developing physically, and where we as fathers really need to be careful of how we affirm them. Sometimes we are good at just correcting and just tearing our kids down compared to affirming them. So we should actually be affirming them a little bit more than tearing them down. Okay, so this is the DISC analysis of behavioral assessment that that each and every one of us will actually do, where we can start to identify what kind of personality traits that we have that can actually be part of that. Okay, and so we also look at the rite of passage when a child turns 12 or 13. What are some of the rites of passage that we can actually do for them? And these are some of the things that they do within the Jewish customs as well. And and also at 21, and how do we perform those rites of passage for our kids? And so this is how we go through that as well, where we actually release them into their destiny. probably just one short story when we did this. I think there was when we did the training in 2008, 18. After we went through this session, we had a gentleman, I think he was in his 50s, maybe mid 50s. He stood up during the session and he asked the facilitator, Pastor Kasi, if he could call him into manhood, And so this man, 55 years old, realized that even though he was 55 years of age, he was still a child within. And, and it was a result of his father not affirming him as a man or calling him into manhood. And so during the session, he asked if the pastor could actually affirm him and call him into a manhood. And so they got the oil. The pastors in the session all stood up, laid hands on him, and they prayed over him and called him into manhood. So it was just a beautiful occasion where you had this 55-year-old man in his 50s, asking to be prayed over and be called into manhood as well. And so something that's important for us as men. Okay, and then the mainly one of the last few chapters is restoring some of the damage. So obviously we have children that are maybe older, have moved out of the house, and maybe some of the things that we have not done as a father that may have resulted in the way that they are living their lives now. And so what are some of the things that we can do to restore some of the damage that we may have caused in our children? And so we look at some of the processes of owning the problem, forgive the person, step into inner victory, and then you walk through together as well. And so we go through that in depth in that process as well. Okay, and so this is just some of the slides that we actually looked at there. And then that's basically the first 10 chapters is basically that for the fathers. And then chapter 11, so a lot of the time we do the training, the mothers are also asking, okay, what about the mom as well? How can the mothers actually do this? So there's actually another training as well for the mothers. We look at some of the responsibilities, the 5 responsibilities of a mother, in validating the husband, imparting intimacy to the children, nurturing and caring for the children, maintaining the social networks for the family, and being the primary homemaker as well. Okay, so we go through that in depth as well. And then in chapter 12, we talk about single mothers as well. And so these are just some of the slides, some of the things that we discover as well as for single moms. And so how important, so that if you have a single mom, how it's important to have a father figure that's involved in the life of the children, even though they may come from single moms. And so having the presence of a father figure is important. It could be through an uncle, a grandparent, have a validation of a value system for the children, appropriate interventions and certain development during the sensitive times, like we talk about the seasons of life, as well as having regular meetings so that you have a father figure in the life of the child, especially for single mom homes. Okay. So yeah, so that's basically just an overview of the sessions that we actually go through. And